Imagine waking up every day, hoping to see your lost child walk through the door, only to be haunted by the silence. This is the story of Mrs. Mary Scott and her son, Mark. One September morning, Mrs. Scott stepped out of her tiny brick house, clutching birdseed, and was greeted by a flock of doves. But her attention was drawn to a young man down the block, and for a moment, she thought it was her son, Mark, who had been missing since 1972. Mark, a blue-eyed teenager with dimples, walked out of their house one day and never returned, leaving his family in a state of perpetual anguish. The Scotts searched tirelessly, calling friends, driving through streets, and checking hospitals, but Mark was nowhere to be found. Days later, a postcard arrived from Mark, claiming he was in Austin with a job, but his parents knew something was terribly wrong. Mark hadn't taken his beloved Honda C70 motorcycle, and the postcard felt like a cruel joke. Mrs. Scott, then 44, would leave work early to wait on her stoop, hoping to see Mark walking down the street. Every noise at night would make her rush to the front door, praying it was Mark returning home. But on August 8, 1973, the news broke that Dean Corll, a man from their neighborhood, had been killed, and bodies of teenage boys were being unearthed. Corll, known as the Candyman, had been a seemingly pleasant figure in the Heights, handing out treats to children. But the truth was horrifying. Corll, along with two teenage accomplices, had been luring boys, torturing, and killing them. Henley and Brooks, Corll's teenage assistants, confessed to helping him abduct and murder boys, including their own friends. The police discovered 27 bodies, making it the largest multiple murder case in U.S. history at the time. The Heights, a small working-class area, was in shock. How had so many boys disappeared without anyone noticing? The story quickly faded from public memory, overshadowed by other notorious killers like Ted Bundy and John Wayne Gacy. Today, the Heights is a gentrified neighborhood, with new residents unaware of the dark history that once plagued their streets. Aging parents from across the country still send letters to the Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences, hoping for answers about their missing sons. Mrs. Scott, now 83, still wonders if Mark's remains were ever correctly identified. In October, a forensic anthropologist named Sharon Derrick visited Mrs. Scott, offering to help identify Mark's remains using advanced DNA technology. Derrick had been working tirelessly to identify the remaining unidentified bodies from Corll's killings. She had already discovered that one body, previously unidentified, was another victim of Corll, bringing the total to 28. Derrick's work brought some closure to families, but for Mrs. Scott, the news was heartbreaking. The DNA test revealed that the remains given to the Scotts in 1994 were not Mark's. Mrs. Scott's grief was palpable as she realized Mark's body was still missing, possibly lost forever. Despite the sorrow, Mrs. Scott expressed a desire to return the remains to the rightful family. Her son Jeff tried to console her, suggesting that maybe the ocean would uncover Mark's body someday. Mrs. Scott's only wish before she dies is to know where her son is. She finds solace in feeding her doves, especially Miss Whitey, who always comes to see her. As she spreads birdseed, she momentarily looks down the street, hoping to see a familiar figure. But reality sets in, and she returns to her house, where a photo of Mark, smiling with dimples, sits nearby. This is a story of enduring love and unending hope, a mother's quest for closure. "Where is my Mark?" she asks, as the doves flutter around her.